Hello everybody, I'm David Bird. Welcome to Halfspin, where we talk about the sport of knife throwing. Today I want to compare the Smith & Wesson Bullseye to the SOG Fling. All right. The reason I want to compare these two knives is because if you're considering the SOG Fling, you've probably also considered the Smith & Wesson Bullseye. Or you might already own the Smith & Wesson Bullseye and the SOG Fling looks interesting to you and you're thinking about upgrading to the SOG Fling. The only reason I say the word upgrade is because the SOG Fling costs more than the Smith & Wesson Bullseye. But after using both of these for a while, I would like to talk about, is it worth it to get both? Is it worth it to get one over the other? Which one is better? Let's get straight into the comparisons. Okay, so they're both spear point knives. They're both solid stainless steel. You can see that the Smith & Wesson Bullseye is just a tiny bit longer, but not by much. The weight is almost the same on both of them. So some of the differences you can tell, the SOG Fling comes wrapped in a paracord, but you can just pull that off. It's kind of, to me, some free paracord. So I'm gonna set this one down and I'm gonna hold up one where I took off the paracord because I think in this state, it looks most like the Smith & Wesson Bullseye. And so I'm gonna compare them this way, but they do come wrapped in the paracord. Let's talk about the point. They're both spear point knives, but let's talk about the point of the Smith & Wesson versus the SOG Fling. The SOG Fling, if you look at them, you can tell the SOG Fling is a little bit of a wider spear point. And just that little bit of width makes it a little bit harder to stick into your targets. It sticks just fine into end grain, but if you're gonna go with long grain targets, it bounces off. Even if you hit directly into the target, it has a tendency to bounce off unless you use some considerable force. The Smith & Wesson Bullseye has a really nice sharp point on it. It comes to a point that really digs into the target. And so the Smith & Wesson Bullseye is easier to get to stick than the SOG Fling. Now, that's not necessarily a bad thing, but if you are a beginner knife thrower, I would definitely recommend the Smith & Wesson Bullseye over the SOG Fling because it's always nice when you can get the knife to stick. But there are some advantages to the wider blade on the SOG Fling. When I hold it half spin, it feels nicer in my palm. The point is not very pointy, and so when it slides out of my hand, it feels nice against my skin. Where the Smith & Wesson Bullseye, because it's pointy, I can feel that point in my hand when I throw it. So it doesn't feel as nice, but it works better as a throwing knife. Also, this cutout kind of gets in the way of throwing military half spin. It doesn't feel as good as the SOG Fling. Because of that solid blade, that SOG Fling feels really good coming out of the hand military half spin. So SOG, you win points for having that solid blade. It feels good in the hand. It feels nicer throwing the SOG Fling because of that solid blade. These cutouts don't feel as nice throwing the Smith & Wesson Bullseye because they're a little rough on the hands. You feel them. It's not as smooth coming out of the hand.
All right, so Nick is normally a Smith & Wesson Bullseye thrower. I want you to try out these SOG Flings and let me know how they compare.
All right, so these knives are pretty cool. I love the large blade. I like the aesthetic of it. It feels really nice in your fingers when you throw it for a half spin or a 1.5 spin. The knives with the lace here, this kind of whips my hands and it doesn't feel very nice. It feels nice when you're holding it. It doesn't sound as loud. There's no lasting ping if you miss. However, these tails, they whip my fingers and it's unpleasant.
So what would you get? Would you get the Smith & Wesson Bullseye or the Fling? The SOG Fling?
I really like holding it by the handle. I might get the Fling.
All right.
So what about throwing styles? Well, they're both spear point knives. They both have a very similar design, so they throw similarly, but there is some slight differences. I say that the Smith & Wesson Bullseye throws better no spin than the Fling. And that's just because it's a little bit more narrow, a little bit longer, and it comes out a little bit smoother when throwing no spin. Can you throw the SOG Fling no spin? Of course. But I think points go to the Smith & Wesson Bullseye for no spin. For half spin, they both throw really well. The Bullseye, again, will stick a little bit easier half spin because of that sharp point. So points to the Smith & Wesson Bullseye for the sharp point, but the SOG Fling feels nicer because of that solid blade. So kind of a tie there. When it comes to full spin, because the Bullseye is a little bit longer, it rotates better than the SOG Fling. Also, you need to take off that paracord if you're going to throw full spin on the SOG Fling. And so the Smith & Wesson Bullseye, I would say, throws a little bit better for full spin rotational throwing. Okay, so all of that said, which knife should you buy? Well, if you're brand new to knife throwing, I still say that the Smith & Wesson Bullseye is the best knife you can get because it's pointier, it'll stick better into the target, it works for all styles of throwing. It is not the most durable knife out there. When you feel it, it doesn't feel like one of these $100 custom knives, but it is a good knife to learn knife throwing with. The only reason I don't think the SOG Fling is that good to learn knife throwing is because it's a little harder to get it to stick. That's the only reason that I would choose the Smith & Wesson Bullseye when I'm just starting out, is because it'll stick a little bit better than the SOG Fling. If you are a no-spin thrower, I would say forget both of these. There are much better no-spin knives out there, but I think the Smith & Wesson Bullseye throws no-spin just a little bit better. Quality of tips. I said that the Smith & Wesson Bullseye will stick to the target better, but I think the SOG Fling tip will last longer. I break the tips on the Smith & Wesson Bullseyes quite often because of the shape of them and because of the type of stainless steel it's made out of. They bend, they chip, they break. But because of the shape of the SOG Fling, I think the tip of these will last a lot longer than the Smith & Wesson Bullseye. But I can't say for sure because I've only used these for a month. But just looking at them and testing them out, I actually think the SOG Fling is going to be a much more durable knife compared to the Smith & Wesson Bullseye. First of all, because of that solid blade, but also because of the type of tip. Lastly, the SOG Fling looks nicer. It's a better looking knife than the Smith & Wesson Bullseye, especially when it's wrapped in paracord. This is a good looking knife and it feels good in the hand. And so I would choose the SOG Fling just on looks over the Bullseye. Also it feels nicer than the Bullseye, but I think they're pretty much the same when it comes to quality of a throwing knife, but I think that the Smith & Wesson Bullseye is a little bit easier to throw. All right, everybody, I hope this answered any questions that you have. Maybe you were debating between these two knives. Hopefully I helped you out with that. If you have any other questions, throw them in the comments, and I will see you next time.